Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Well, the title of today's content is Ethiopia, to be or not to be. Yes, to be or not to be. And I'm going to get right to the answer to that question. Right to a direct ripping the Band-Aid off of that question. To be or not to be. And the answer is not to be. It will be essentially and is essentially impossible for Ethiopia to exist. It would be difficult for any nation state to exist in the conditions that currently exist in terms of the multitude of ethnic groups that reside within the former state of Ethiopia. Now, back in 2018, there was a tide of support for Abiy Ahmed's Prosperity Party. And by and large, at the time of the ascent to Abiy Ahmed to power, Abiy Ahmed had a fairly significant amount of support from the Oromos. He had a fairly significant amount of support from the Amhara region as well. So just within those two ethnic groups, you're probably looking at about 70 million people out of 130 million people. That was 2018. 2018 was a fairly peaceful time if you look at the history of Ethiopia. But fast forward to 2026, things have changed dramatically. Things have changed dramatically. And again, this all falls on Abiy Ahmed. I had the opportunity to interact with someone who was at a embassy function in Ethiopia with Abiy Ahmed. And I've mentioned this before, that as alcohol was being consumed, Abiy Ahmed commented that he was going to be the longest serving African leader in African history. And that what that essentially meant was that he was going to be the leader of Ethiopia for most of his life, if not the entirety of his life. And he's relatively a young man at the time of that statement. Now, the proof is in the pudding. If we look at what Abiy Ahmed has done, you have to divide. You have to create division. And when you create division, you create conflict. And Abiy Ahmed has been very successful at creating division and creating conflict. And when you create division and conflict, as a leader, the tools that exist at his disposal are the creation of a security state. Prior to Abiy Ahmed, there was no Ethiopian Praetorian Guard. There was no Ethiopian Republican Guard. The Ethiopian Republican Guard now exists, and its thousands of personnel serve one purpose: to protect the regime of Abiy Ahmed. Most recently, he has created the Special Operations Command, or the quote-unquote elite forces. Again, a regime-centric elite force primarily designed to protect Abiy Ahmed. So we're looking at multiple instruments of personal power: Republican Guard, Special Operations Forces, again, designed to protect the regime. And what has that regime done? Again, division. 2018, fast forward to 2026. We now have civil conflict in most areas of the former state of Ethiopia. We have civil conflict which existed in Oromia with the Oromo Liberation Army. Now that is probably one of the smaller ethnic conflicts that currently exist. And ironically, Abiy Ahmed is part of the Oromo ethnic group. So right now, as it sits, probably about 30 to 50% of the population of Oromo supports Abiy Ahmed. That right now is where Abiy Ahmed is primarily drawing his support in terms of fighting age males that are going to keep him in power. But again, that is a significant population base in the tens of millions when you control the strings of government. Significant population base. We move up to the Amhara region. At one point, the ethnic Amharans were very much in support of Abiy Ahmed. There was this unification within the Prosperity Party where we were seeing a large group of ethnic Amharans and Oromos uniting under the banner of Abiy Ahmed. That is no longer the case. Abiy Ahmed saw the special forces, the autonomous paramilitary police slash militia type organization that exists in all of the regions of Ethiopia. Abiy Ahmed felt that that was too powerful and needed to be dissolved. So, again, but we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here in terms of other conflicts that have transpired since his ascent to power. But again, right now, at one point where the Amhara region was supporting Abiy Ahmed, that is no longer the case. It is widely believed that the majority of the Amhara region no longer supports Abiy Ahmed. In fact, there is an industrial-grade insurgency taking place right now in the Amhara region with Fano. And you're looking at 10, possibly 20,000 militia that have rebelled against the Abiy Ahmed loyalist forces, which are, in fact, fairly significant. And probably at this point, the largest military in sub-Saharan Africa. You're looking at a number of about 500,000 troops under the command of Abiy Ahmed, under his rapidly deteriorating Prosperity Party. But because you have such a significant population base of 130 million people, even if you have 10 to 20% of support, you still can raise large amounts of loyalist manpower. And that's what he has done. Even with just 10% to 20% of population support, a dictator can remain in power if he controls the purse strings, which he does, and he has created security institutions that protect his ability to stay in power. He has effectively done that. So he controls the purse strings, and he controls military organizations that are very much loyal to Abiy Ahmed. And those individuals who then command the military only survive like any dictatorial regime, if they support Abiy Ahmed totally. So again, if we go back to 2018 to where we're at now, we have industrial strength insurgency in the Amhara region. We have industrial strength or minor industrial strength insurgency in western Oromo. We have had all-out war in the Tigray region, culminating in a multi-year conflict in which hundreds of thousands of people were killed. There is a festering Somali insurgency in the Ogaden region in eastern Ethiopia. So this is a perfect mix, a perfect storm in which a nation state cannot exist. And then compounding that, we have external forces as well in the form of Eritrea. And remember, at one point, Eritrea was supporting Abiy Ahmed. That is no longer the case. Abiy Ahmed, again, as most dictators will do, and make no mistake of it, Abiy Ahmed is a dictator. As most dictators, most tyrants will do, they will eventually look externally to foster possible war and conflict in order to garner internal support. That external conflict is Abiy Ahmed loyalist forces wanting to take control of a Red Sea port. Right now, Ethiopia is landlocked. At one point, Eritrea was part of Ethiopia. Abiy Ahmed would like to see Eritrea part of Ethiopia again, and is willing to, in all probability, launch a military conflict, one, to garner that seaport, and two, create external conflict, which removes attention from the internal instability that is currently taking place inside of Ethiopia. So again, to be or not to be, that is the question. And the short answer, again, not to be. The most ideal situation that could occur right now is the complete fragmentation of Ethiopia into either fully autonomous or semi-autonomous republics. Tigray, in all likelihood and in all probability, will be a fully autonomous and independent nation state. That is the trajectory that we are currently on right now. Will we see a merger with Eritrea? Difficult to say. They share a common language and culture, which could be conducive for a unification, one would think, between Eritrea and Tigray. Are we on that course right now? Again, difficult to say. The Amhara region, fragmented, fighting, internal discord, very angry at Abiy Ahmed. The Oromo region, fractured, with still probably 30 to 50% supporting Abiy Ahmed. But look, you cannot have an effective nation state if you have 30 to 50% of one ethnic group that supports the dictator. Because again, where we're at right now is a fragmented society. A fragmented society in which you have Amharan, you have, to a certain extent, Oromo, you have Tigray, you have in all probability, which will be Muslim separatists that will eventually, if not exist now, in which they do exist now, they will most certainly, at a certain point within the ethnic Somali groupings that live in eastern Ethiopia, will eventually rise up. They've done it before, they will do it again. So again, the long-term extended outlook for the existence of an effective state is very bleak. Very bleak indeed. It is almost like it should not exist. Look, if it was more homogeneous, maybe. Homogeneous, maybe. Maybe. But that is not the case. You have a multitude of ethnic groups that, rightfully so, are very much interested in self-preservation. I think what has happened in the Amhara region is the ultimate proof of what Abiy Ahmed was trying to do. The Amhara region exhibited too much power. It was a threat to the leadership of Abiy Ahmed. So instead of reaching some sort of compromise, what happened? Well, Abiy Ahmed has used his military to go after those Amharan Fano militia groups, which up until just a few years ago, it was perfectly okay for these regions to have their own militia forces, their own internal security apparatus, which was answerable to the regional government, much like a National Guard here in the United States. Could be federalized, but could also be used by the regional governments. It was not centrally controlled by, guess who? Yeah, Abiy Ahmed. And that's the problem that Fano and the Amhara region had. But it was absolutely going to happen, because if you look at what occurred in the Tigray region, it had all the hallmarks of when the Tigrayan War broke out, in which Abiy Ahmed essentially canceled elections and was positioning himself to take away any regional power or any regional self-determination within the Tigray region. That was absolute. And now we sit with tens of thousands of Abiy loyalist forces that are currently now massing along the borders and in western Tigray, with quite possibly eyes towards a massive military effort against the Tigray region again, but also quite the possibility of a military move of Abiy loyalist forces of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces against Eritrea. Now again, Abiy Ahmed controls the purse strings. He controls the ability to modernize, and that is one of the things that he has done. He has purchased more advanced technology in the forms of combat drones and precision-guided weapon systems, and he has been able to do that because he has the funding to do that. And he has been able to increase his military capacity ahead of the military capacity of Eritrea. Yes, Eritrea has vast sums of soldiers because it has essentially universal conscription, but Eritrea lacks in funding and the ability to bring in these advanced technologies that we are seeing now in war. I think if you go back and you look at the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, again, at one point, if we go back to the 90s, Armenia had an edge on Azeri military capability. But because Azerbaijan was a much more wealthier nation state, they were able to bring in and advanced its military far beyond the capabilities in terms of technological capability that we would see in the and that's my cat making a lot of noise. Yeah, that's what he does. Anyway, so that's what we saw in terms of that conflict. Now, is that going to be the same? Are we going to see that occur in a new Abiy loyalist forces war against Eritrea and quite possibly the Tigrayan Defense Forces? Possibly. But this is a mess beyond a mess. It just can't get any worse in terms of the possibility of a nation state fracturing the way Ethiopia could fracture. Very much so. So we'll continue to watch what is happening on the ground. Again, we're watching this military buildup very closely, and we will continue to report on what happens. Thank you very much for joining us. Good day.